My dear people, it was 27 years ago when the walls came tumbling down around the Soviet Union, and we old codgers, we remember it well, but for the young people, of course, it's ancient history. I've been in Russia now 27 years, went from Evansville, Indiana, and my partner, Father Dan Maurer, from Benton Harbor, Michigan. Back then, we were thinking about the Soviet Union, and we looked at each other and said, who's going to go? Somebody has to go. There's people over there who haven't received the sacraments for years. And we said, well, silly, let's go. And so we packed up our bags and flew to Vladivostok, which is right across the Pacific Ocean, same latitude as Detroit, between Japan and China, and our parish borders on North Korea. So we're right over there in the center of the action these days. Well, what happened was we were religious, you know, so we didn't have any money. We had a car to sell, so we sold the car and got $2,000. And with that, we bought the tickets were $1,000, so we had $1,000 left. We got to the airport in San Francisco. They said, oh, too much luggage, $200. So then we're down to $800. We get to Vladivostok, and they say, we've rented an apartment for you. It even has a telephone. $400. And so I see the money flying out the window, and I look at our first parishioners, and they're all elderly people on pensions, and I thought, help! How are we going to survive over here? Then I remembered that I had a friend in Minnesota who was kind of a science buff, and he was telling me about this new invention. It was called the Internet. I thought, oh, I wonder if I can get Internet here in Russia. So I went to the Academy of Science. Yes, they have Internet. Can I get an address for electronic mail? Yes, you could. And so I immediately wrote my friend in Minnesota, and I said, help! He was a Knight of Columbus and a member of the Bishop's Formation Committee, and so a very active layman, and I said, please start doing something to see if you can locate some funds so we can continue to work here in Russia. And that's how Mary, Mother of God Mission Society was born. We've been in Minnesota, then in Alaska, then in St. Paul, Minnesota, and now we're in Modesto, California. And that is the main fundraising vehicle for all of our work in Russia through these 27 years. We're very grateful to Americans who've given us such support. So what did we find when we got over to Vladivostok? Well, for one thing, we found that it was unique in that it was the only diocese, Roman Catholic diocese, ever to exist in Russia itself. And miracle of miracles, the cathedral was still standing. Because you know, the communists, they bombed churches everywhere. But what happened was that the cathedral was built at the time, being built at the time of the Russian Revolution, and it took time for the revolution to come to Vladivostok on the Trans-Siberian Railroad so far away, 7 time zones. And so the communists didn't come until 1922, and that's the same year that the cathedral was dedicated. So the cathedral was immediately confiscated. The parishioners were in terror about what was going to happen to them because they heard of the death and destruction that the communists had done all the way across Russia already. So many parishioners walked to China to get away from Russia. They didn't want to take the bus or the train because they'd have to show some ID, and they didn't want anybody to know who they were. They were terrified. Some left on ships to San Francisco, to Australia, back to Europe through the Suez Canal, and very few managed to remain. So what had been a big flourishing diocese with 15,000 parishioners in the diocese suddenly came to a screeching halt. You can imagine what that would be here. If all of a sudden the government would say, we don't want any more Catholics. That's the end of your parish. Close the door. Wow. So they arrested all of the priests of the diocese. They were sent to Siberia, where they died in the camps. The bishop was arrested and sent outside the city, where he had to live on the porch of a little building, and that building is still there. And he was forbidden to say Mass, and he was forbidden to meet with parishioners. And of course, he died there in 1933, 11 years after the confiscation. A very old man, but he is a candidate for sainthood now for the Soviet period in Russia. The last 5 parishioners were killed in 1937. Why do we call them the last 5? Because they were the last people who dared to gather to pray together. So they gathered one Sunday, 5 men, to say the rosary together. They were all arrested, they were shot. And we have the records from KGB saying they were arrested for their religious activities. So they are the martyrs of our parish, but really how many martyrs there are, we don't know. Recently, the bulldozers were building a new road around Vladivostok, and they ran into a mass grave site, and there were thousands of skeletons in the grave site. Are they the skeletons of our last parishioners, or the bishop, or how many of our parishioners? We don't know. You know, the communists, they hate 3 things. One thing is religion, which means God. They hate God. Number 2, they hate family life. And number 3, they hate private property. So they express their hatred for religion by bombing the churches throughout Russia. We're really lucky that our cathedral, it was a brand new building. They didn't blow it up. They built floors inside of it and became the state archive. And so when I got there, it was still there. But it hadn't been repaired. The birds were flowing in and out of the broken windows. The heating system didn't work. And so when we asked for it back, they were glad to get rid of it. So we were the second Catholic church to receive back in Russia. First in Tomsk in Siberia, and ours in Vladivostok. And so since then, we, of course, happily tried to reconstruct the parish and have done a lot of work. But what about the hatred of family? Yes, marriage was outlawed in Russia for a while. They said, all bad habits are passed on in the family, so get rid of the family. And they forgot that good habits are passed on in the family. They said kids should be raised in an orphanage. They shouldn't even know who their parents are. They also instituted abortion on demand. First country in the world to have abortion on demand. The average Russian woman had done 7 abortions. And of course, they suffer terribly from that. Even today, the divorce rate in Russia is 80%. 80% of marriages end in divorce in the first 2 years. And so you can see what a terrible thing it was, because people don't want to give up their religion, and they don't want to give up their family, and they don't want to give up their property. When we went to Russia, it was still the Soviet Union, 1991, and the stores were empty. There was nothing to buy, nothing to eat. And that's what happened when you don't have private enterprise and private property. As the Russians would say, we make believed we worked, and they make believed they paid us. It's all make-believe if you're not able to earn and own. And so, of course, it all turned very terrible for everybody, and that's why the whole thing came to a screeching end at the end of 1991. Well, what have we been doing since then? Well, thanks be to God, of course, the parishioners were happy to welcome us back and once again have Mass. Since then, we've founded 9 parishes in the territory. We have 6 crisis pregnancy centers operating, with saving over 2,500 children already. This year, we're dedicating a new church in Nahodka, a brand new Gothic-style Roman Catholic church, which will be the pride of the city. Meanwhile, also, we have redecorated the cathedral, taken the floors out, and finished the steeples, and now we have the beautiful church, which can be seen from most of the city because of the tall steeples. And also, the church is very popular right now because we have organ concerts, because they never had many organs in Russia anywhere since they didn't have churches. And now our organ concerts are just full all the time of people coming to hear an organ for the first time in their lives. And of course, the parishioners are so happy once again to be free. So once again, there's private property in Russia. The stores are full. The supermarkets go 24 hours a day. Buy whatever you want. We can even buy peanut butter now. Such an American thing. And family life is back in order. I recently had to fly from Russia to Kazakhstan, and I was amazed at how many whole families with kids were on the plane. And religion, of course, even the president of Russia now is a Christian. You see him going to communion, making the sign of the cross on the news programs. And of course, he is in favor of rebuilding churches all across Russia. The theory is the government blew up the churches, so the government has to rebuild them. And so everywhere now, especially Orthodox churches, are being built. And so, do we have any problems yet in Russia? Yes, we do. And so those are the things I want to talk to you about and ask for your help. I think there'll be a second collection today. Or also after Mass downstairs, there are some things you can buy and some literature if you would like to have it. But these are our problems. The first problem is, now there's a law in Russia outlawing missionaries. So the reason for the law is that the non-Christian religions come into Russia with big funding and lots of missionaries, especially the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Mormons. But Russia was a Christian country for 900 years before the atheists took it over. And so Russia sees this as a threat to its national identity, having all these non-Christian missionaries come into the country. But of course, the Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church, we have to obey the law also. So professional missionaries are no longer invited to Russia. So what does it mean? What it means is, you parishioners are our missionaries. The church is always evangelizing, and it means that we have to help, as you are learning here exactly the same thing, how you yourselves should be missionaries for Christ and how you will increase the size of the parish. And so, but it's a bigger problem in Russia than it is for you. And the reason is, the people in Russia lived in terror that somebody would find out they were believers. And so it's very hard for them to share their faith or to speak about their religion. One of my parishioners came to me and she said, "Father, look at my hands." Said, "This is where they tortured me. This is what they did to me." And you know, she still can't get over the fear that somebody would find out that she's a Christian. If she goes into the church, she breaks out in a cold sweat like claustrophobia, and she has to leave. And so I have to take her communion on a park bench. And every time it's a different park bench, because she's afraid the KGB is following her around to this day. And so that kind of fear we have to overcome in our parish in Vladivostok. So that's a good prayer intention for those of you who are prayer warriors in the parish, that our parishioners can get over their fears and learn to be evangelizers. You know, say to your neighbor that's sick, "Hey, I'm going to pray for you today." You know, or somebody that's in trouble, say, "Why don't you go to church with me?" You know, it's not really a big deal in order to evangelize, but you have to be unafraid to do it and step out and do it. That's our first problem. The second problem is one we didn't expect. All of a sudden, the Far Eastern Federal University in Vladivostok has all kinds of international students. They come to Russia to study medicine, You know, Russia was the first country in the world, the research country on transplant surgery. They come to Russia to study space engineering, oil and gas engineering, electricity production, hydroelectricity, the things that Russia is good at. So, for example, we have 200 students from Colombia in South America who are now our parishioners. How did we know? So we have to have Mass now not only in Russian, but also in English this year. And next year we're starting Mass in Spanish. It's a bit of a problem because the university is far from the parish. The parish is in the center of the city, the university is on Russian Island. So we have to build a chapel for the university students on the island and offer social events there for Catholic students and liturgy, Mass, prayer, so that they have a place to go to and continue their Catholic faith while they're students at the university. So that's the second problem. We have to build that chapel. The third problem is my favorite problem. How can a problem be your favorite? Well, you'll see. The third problem is we have so many vocations now. Wow. We get vocations from Russia, from India, from Pakistan, from Vietnam, from Philippines, Indonesia. And so many men write me on the internet and say, please, I want to work in Russia. Please, I want to be a priest. Let me join your community. And we're getting wonderful vocations. In fact, we're getting so many, we've already farmed out 2 to Las Vegas, Nevada. You go there to gamble, you might meet our priests. And just 2 weeks ago, I sent 2 priests to Kazakhstan. The bishops there said, please send us priests. And so we're starting. I have 2 more I think I'm going to send there. More priests than we can use right now in Russia. And why is that a problem? Because we have to pay for their seminary education, of course. It's cheaper there in Asia than it is here in America, but it still is a sum of money. I don't want to tell guys, we can't afford to have you. Sorry. Because we prayed for vocations for so long, and now we see them coming, and we want to accept them. So it's a wonderful, exciting thing to have happen to us. So if you're able to help us, I'll be glad. Well, let's see. I got to tell you a story. I'll tell you the tiger story. So one time this lady came and she said, Father, my mother died. What should I do? She was Catholic. I said, oh, I'm sorry to hear that she died. I wish you had come to me when she was still living. But here's a rosary you can put in her hands in the coffin, and here's a prayer book you can say the prayers at her funeral. And as we were talking, I said, are you sure your mother died? She said, well, my sister called, and the doctor said that mother had 20 minutes to live, and that was 40 minutes ago. I said, so you don't know if your mother died. Call your sister. So she called her sister. Is Mom still alive? Yes, she is. Let's go. So I went and got the holy oils and the Blessed Sacrament, and we're heading out to the village where Mother lives. It's called Tigrovaya, which means Tigerville. It's an hour-and-a-half drive from Vladivostok. So we get almost there, and all of a sudden she stops the car and she says, now we have to walk. I said, walk? In Tigerville, we have to walk? Because in our state, there are still 500 tigers. That's why we don't have any deer. Luckily, the tigers don't eat corn, so we're okay. So there we go, through the woods and down the creek and up the other side, and I'm thinking, oh, they're looking at me now for dinner. Well, we finally get to this log cabin in the woods. And I go inside and I meet the sister, and I said, is Mother still alive? She says, yes, she is. Hallelujah. So I go into the bedroom, and there's Mom, obviously dying. And the daughter yells out, Mom, the priest is here. And Mom opens up her eyes. She looks up at me. She reaches up, grabs me, and gives me a big kiss. Well, her clothes fell off. So the daughter says, Father, go in the kitchen, I'll put some clothes on her. So I come back in, and Mom says, guess what? I said, what? I don't know. What? I said, God came, and he gave me a big kiss. So I wasn't going to disagree with her. So I was happy to give her anointing of the sick and Holy Communion, and then she said, "It was so wonderful, let's go talk about it." So she's jumping out of bed and putting on her boots, and we're heading out the door on the porch, and meanwhile her other children are arriving for the funeral. She was just as live as she could be. In fact, she lived for 6 months after that. And she said, "You know, there's another man down the road here, he's also Catholic." I said, "Oh, well, while I'm here, I'll go down and see him." So this was his story. He was elderly. And he said, "Yeah, when I was a boy in the Ukraine, the Nazis were pretty bad. And my dad was arrested. And my mother was petrified that she would be next. So she grabbed me and my sister, and we're heading out of town. And we walked past the church, and Mass was going on. So we went in to go to Mass. And Mom went up for communion, so I went up too. And we got out of church. Mom said, "You're a bad boy. You didn't make your first communion yet. You shouldn't have gone to communion." He said, "But Father, that's the only time I've been to communion in my life." So I was happy in his old age to give him Holy Communion and the anointing of the sick and confirmation and so on. And I said, "You know why this is happening?" Because this is the reason. He said, "You know what happened to my sister? She became the director of an orphanage. And during the Nazi period, she took in Jewish babies to save them from the Gestapo. And they found out about it, and they hanged my sister." I said, "See, you have a sister who's a saint in heaven. And that's why the priest came to see you after all these years here toward the end of your life." Well, you can tell it's been great fun being a missionary. I always tell young people, I don't know why you think you don't want to be priests. We have great fun. And what a wonderful opportunity it was to work in the Soviet Union. And I'm so happy that we were able to work there, and with your support and help, we'll continue. God bless you.